Morning, this is just a quick video on how I went about making this sheep feeder from pallet wood, scrap corrugated iron and an old drum.
As always, I start by cutting and pulling apart the pallets. 45 palings ended up being plenty. I used a cutting disc on the angle grinder to cut the drum in half lengthways. I started with the thick spots of the drum first so I could utilise the full depth of the cutting disc before it started to wear out. The melted plastic makes quite a mess, but it's not too difficult to brush off. There was a couple of spots that the cutting disc didn't reach, so I finished it off with a hacksaw. I then cleaned up the edges with a rasp. For the main structure, I used the centre beams of the pallet. My husband used a hammer and chisel to split the remainder of the palings away, and then he could remove all the nails. I made the back wall first, and that is just a simple frame held together with bugle screws. I use my speed square to keep all my cuts straight. Pre-drill all your holes, then give them a chamfer. You want your back wall to fit nicely around your drum. I then started laying down all the palings for the back wall, keeping the bottom edge flush. To quickly mark where I wanted all my holes, I use a straight edge to mark center of my top and bottom beam. Then I drag all the palings forward so I can drill straight through on the line. Then again, chamfer all the holes. Once all the palings are attached, flip it over and cut your top edge flush with the beam. I want the front edge of the drum to be closer to the ground to make it a little bit easier for them to eat out of. I then drilled and attached the drum to the back wall. Moving on to the side walls, I drilled 2 pocket holes on either side. This isn't exactly how you're supposed to use this jig, but I don't have the rest of it and this works just fine. I wanted a decent pitch for the roof, so I made the front post a foot longer than the back. To attach your pocket hole piece to your front post, clamp it down onto the bench and butt the other piece up to it. Now to join your 2 side L pieces together. It's easier to lay one of the L pieces on a flat surface with the other one balancing on top of both your top and bottom beam. And it is a bit of a juggling act, so I give the bugles a good tap to get them started in the correct position. Now we can walk that back over to the rest of the build and attach them at the bottom where we previously drilled our pocket holes. To keep the front parallel with the back, I cut 2 palings the same length as the base and attached them higher up. It is now square and strong. I pre-cut and drilled my side panels and used a spare paling underneath the base to give me a flatter surface than the grass. Attach 2 palings along the lower front to give it a cleaner finish. Moving on to these side pieces, this isn't necessary but it does hide the ugly sides of the drum. For the back cut, I set the circular saw at 15 degrees and the front edge at 45 degrees, using the speed square to keep the cut straight. Now to notch it out. Mark where you'll be making your cuts, then use a jigsaw to cut them out. Since some of the cuts need to be angled, I sit one edge of the jigsaw on a scrap piece of wood and cut at an angle, and then straight cut the rest. That looks so much better and possibly worth the effort. Drill 3 holes from the outside to attach it. Moving on to the roof. Mark the thickness of the front beam on the outside edge. I just used an offcut. Now grab your straight edge and hold it level with the top of the back wall and the mark that you just made. Then cut along your line. I cut both ends of the rafter parallel with the post to give it a cleaner looking finish. I attached the rafters from the inside only so the screws were hidden. To finish off the sides, I attach a paling to the inside of the rafter to give me something to attach the side palings to. I cut the back angle first, then mark where I will cut the front edge. I believe the best way to find your angle is to first start with a clean cut paling. Push it as far as it will go, then mark on your rafter and lower paling where that piece reached. Grab your ruler and take the lower measurement. Transfer that length onto the top edge of your paling. Then draw a straight line from the bottom corner to your mark. Cut along your line and you have a perfect fit. And since the pitch of the roof remains the same, you can use the offcuts further up. Moving on to the hay feeder at the back. I cut 5 palings at 45 degrees. Worked out my spacing and drilled 2 holes for each. Drill your holes at a bit of an angle to allow the screws to go straight up into your palings. I decided I wanted the height of the hay feeder to be the same height as the back wall, so I held the spirit level on the back wall and marked the height onto the paling. Transfer that length onto the rest of the palings and cut those at 40 degrees. Attach and pre-drill a hole into each of those pieces, then bring in your joining piece. I marked where each piece is supposed to sit so I can easily line them up before attaching. I didn't film this part, but I also attached that front piece on both sides. They are liking it already, even though it isn't for these guys. The length of the roof was determined by the offcuts of the corrugated iron. I just needed to straighten up the edge and I used an offcut to get a straight line in the valleys. Use tin snips or a cutting disc on the angle grinder to cut your sheets. To attach the corrugated iron, I punched a nail through first to create a hole for the screws. You would normally put the screws on the ridge, but the screws I have are not long enough and this is a feeder, not a house, so I think we'll be fine. Now for another unnecessary step that does nothing for the structural integrity of the feeder, but does make it look better, is the fascia. I joined these two pieces together before attaching to the feeder. And then I made these little end caps. This step is crucial because it looks like garbage without it. Here we have the hay cage at the top and the grain drum at the bottom, which also helps to catch the fallen hay. I really like the hay cage because it prevents them from pulling the entire thing out and stomping it into the ground.
If you liked this video or found it somewhat helpful, then give me a thumbs up. If you didn't, you can give me a thumbs down if you like, but either way, I hope I see you next time.